welcome to Support Life, a program focusing on current social issues from a life-affirming perspective. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Judith Justice, who's here all the way from the USA from Indiana Wesleyan University. Welcome to this little show.
Thank you.
Okay, so Indiana's like where?
Indiana is considered the Midwest, although it's on the eastern half of the country. Midwest in terms of population, I guess. But if you know anything about Chicago, is on one side of Lake Michigan, on the west side, and we are on the south side of Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. If that gives you an idea.
Okay, so what's Indiana famous for?
Corn.
Corn.
Indianapolis 500. We have the raceway that was at one time one of the largest events in the whole world. You know, the raceway. Yeah. The Pacers. You know, the basketball team, Indiana Pacers, and the basketball. That's basketball, and football is the Indianapolis Colts. And me.
Oh, of course.
Me.
You're there. Okay. And what sweeps through the plains? Anything?
You mean the wind?
Oh, well, that's what I'm getting at. The wind. There's wind there, is there?
Well, Chicago is considered the windy city, and we get a fair amount of wind. We do get tornadoes.
Twisters?
Ice storms. Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of awesome nature stuff happening.
Okay. All right. So does that throw people? I mean, if you're growing crops and dependent on the weather, what do these kind of horrific twisters and tornadoes do to the psyche?
It does affect people. In crops, my family were farmers, and I don't know that we really were. They all had side jobs, so we weren't really dependent on that. Although we've had a fair amount of like drought, where we'll go for maybe 3 years in a row, very little, enough rain to exist. Our existence isn't threatened, but the crops are. And so farmers have a hard time with that. The government subsidizes that generally. So in terms of psyche, I think people stick with it because they were mostly born into it, and they're strong people, so they endure. So
why is there a university on these corn plains?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, a lot of people wonder why they're at this university that's surrounded by corn. God works in mysterious ways, and somehow the university ended up there. It started as Marian College some time ago, 100 years ago, I guess. And then the Indiana Wesleyan name came maybe in the past 20 years. And it's growing. It's people appreciate the heart that's there, really very loving people, and so it's a growing university.
Okay, well, talking about loving people, you always wanted to come to Australia, and you're here,
right?
Only by a few days, and leaving in a few days. Why would you do a short trip of 18 hours in an aluminum tube, 36,000 feet above the earth?
It's adventurous, and I felt a calling to do this. I've been wanting to be a part of Inside Out. Inside Out is an organization that holds film camps. It originated around Indiana Wesleyan University, not exactly, but in that community. And I received an email along with other counseling folks in my department, and about an interest of working with Inside Out in terms of counseling. And I thought, yeah, that sounded cool. So I responded, and then that was maybe 4 years ago. And my job did not accommodate time for that. I work 10 months out of the year. And so I requested, as a professor, you can propose to do sabbatical. So I proposed to take the year to do service work, and with Inside Out, and also with the American Red Cross, where we help in disasters. So this availability of Inside Out Australia came, and I thought, awesome, I'll see if I can do that, and it happens.
We've got some students here from the Tongan community who are just observing this conversation. this interview. And in fact, I'm running this purely on their notes today. And I've browsed through them, and we could go anywhere because I haven't done my pre-interview with you. Children?
Yeah. Yes. I have 5 great kids. Started with 2 girls and 3 boys. And between them, we have going on 10 grandchildren. Okay.
Now, did something kind of strike one down? Is it arthritis that they suffered?
My oldest, was named with arthritis when she was 6 years old.
What was that like? I mean, for her, for yourselves?
It was horrendous because she's a baby and she's 6, and she was having this swelling in her knees, and by the time she would wake up like this. So by the time I would get her to the doctor, it would be normal. And so for maybe 4 months, we couldn't name it. And finally, and they would do blood tests, and nothing happened. And finally, after maybe 6 months, it was a Saturday morning, and she was dragging herself down the hallway with her legs behind her. And I called the doctor right away, and the doctor said, well, I don't want to alarm you, but we think she has juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and she may end up in a wheelchair. Like, not very tactful, really. So that was hard. But she, it's not a big part of her life. I didn't want that to be her identity. Her name is Joy, and she is a joyful woman, and she has many gifts. She would play the piano, and she's an artist, and she's been able to do all of those things. So again, we didn't let that remain her identity. We wanted her to be who she is.
Well, Judith, on that joyous but not quite so joyous note, you're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Judith Justice from the Indiana Wesleyan University in the United States. We brought up a word, joy, and it's the name of your daughter. And she was very young when she got this juvenile arthritis. And now that the years have gone by, would you have changed anything?
No. I have trusted God for every walk of life. In terms of family, Joy is our oldest, and actually when she was diagnosed, I had just then found out I was expecting our 4th child. And at that point, just before that, while she was getting sick, I started back to university for an education degree, and and then I found out I was expecting a 4th child unexpectedly, and that sort of threw a wrench in things. I don't dwell a lot on those. In fact, I hadn't even thought about that for years. But she needed lots and lots of care. In fact, there was a point at which someone in my church said, "Oh, I hear your caring for this child is like a full-time job." That's an interesting way to look at it, because I was doing everything I could to keep her healthy and mobile. And there were 3 other children, So, no, I wouldn't have done anything differently. Life has purpose, whatever the situation, and God has a plan. So it's great. I'd say it's perfect.
Okay, so this unexpected pregnancy, in the midst of other circumstances, threw you a little bit, but you see purpose in it. So what do you say to those young women out there, or any woman who has an unexpected pregnancy?
The same, that God has a purpose outside of our knowledge, and we are a vessel to serve that purpose. And I heard recently a gentleman say that the men, one of the biggest abuses is the absence of men. So I think, yes, women have this motherhood to take care of, and hopefully the men can be there in support of them as well.
Are there a lot of university students struggling with these issues today?
In America, we have social welfare. And so up until recently, the government was very free to pass out money to the needs of women and unwed women especially. Now, as recently as maybe 10 years ago, they started going after the men and saying, who is the father? And the father will have to pay back this subsidy. Mm-hmm. So I think there's something good about that. So there's a saying that your money is where your heart is. And there's a requirement for men, and I don't know if this is true in Australia or not, but in America, child support is a big deal. And so we want to know the fathers are supporting the babies. In part, more than the financial support is if they're giving the money, then they're giving the heart, and that's important.
Okay, now counselling plays a major role in your life now. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
Well, I'm counseling. My degree was in school counseling, my master's degree, and then my doctoral degree is child, family, and youth studies. So Indiana Wesleyan took me on to promote their school counseling program, and that's what I do. So what an awesome job. I work with, for 19 years I was a school counselor, and 9 years as a professor. So for part of that time for 9 years I was working 1.5 jobs, which was crazy. So I had to, for my own mental health, I had to give it up. As much as I loved school counseling, I needed to care for myself, so I gave that up 1.5 years ago. And so I have all kinds of stories about counseling youth. But kids will go to school with all kinds of yuck in their lives, and they need to know somebody loves them and somebody cares about what's going on for them. So that's how I saw school counseling, is helping them be secure in their school, that they had friends, they had someone who cared, that they were comfortable enough to be able to learn and to grow. So aside from that, too, I'm also a mental health counselor, and I've served with the Red Cross in disasters like Hurricane Katrina. And then a year ago we had a fire in Arizona that killed 19 firefighters, and that devastated the town. That was a big majority. It was a small little town, and they lost 19 of their men. So I was there to counsel with that as well.
Judith, life is precious.
It is.
And when there's a loss of life, such as that took place in the town with those 19 firefighters, it just affects everybody. Kind of a ripple effect. Is there a term for that kind of grief when it's so broad? It affects so many people. When you're counselling them, what do you say? Well,
in part, there's an initial shock. So actually my job in those situations is oftentimes to take care of, yes, the immediate needs of the clients, or we call them survivors, but also to take care of those who are there to help, because it can be emotionally draining to be assisting people who are in such trauma. So I'd like to give a little example of something that happened with the Hurricane Katrina. Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am. And what we might do is just take a break and come back to this example.
Okay.
You're watching Support Life, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Support Life. I'm Gavin Baulch, and my guest is Judith Justice from Indiana Wesleyan University in the United States. Judith, we were just about to go into a story about the Hurricane Katrina, and you had an example out of the traumas of that event. Would you like to share it with us?
Yes, I would. This was a magnificent disaster. If you remember it, the Gulf Coast encompasses a very large part of the United States, and this massive hurricane just wiped out many, many cities along the way. Biloxi, Mississippi, New Orleans, Louisiana, from state to state. Well, anyway, the clients that we had were folks who, in New Orleans, this levee had broken in this huge lake, coupled with this massive amount of water that came from the hurricane from the Gulf of Mexico. So the whole city was underwater. Coffins were being raised from the cemeteries. There were bodies floating around, current dead bodies plus cemetery bodies. It was, and people, my clients had pushed bodies aside to get through water. It was horrific. And at that point, the point at which my folks were rescued from a bridge, they made themselves up onto this bridge, and they had been there like up to 3 days before help came for them, helicopters and boats, whatever could get them off. So then they were brought to this big arena, the Gator Dome in Lafayette, Texas. They were brought there unbeknownst to many people. There were children who were on the rooftops with their child care providers. Mom and dad went to a facility perhaps in Mississippi, and their kids were brought to Louisiana, and nobody could find anyone. And at that point, they believed there were tens of thousands of people who had perished. It was massive. And these families were without each other. So it was, devastating to them. So anyway, they brought in, ours were some of the last rescued and some of the deepest inner city, maybe the most of poverty folks who were rescued. So they brought in this awesome pastor from New York City. They flew him in for a Sunday morning. And he said to us, I was part of the Sunday morning ceremony, he said, find a partner and grab hands. And I happened to find maybe an 11-year-old boy. And he said, look at each other and say, I am not today what I will be tomorrow. I am not today what I will be. Say it louder. Say it again. Say it again. And before you know it, the whole place is chanting, I am not today who I will be tomorrow. And it was awesome to see the tears and the hope that instilled in them. So I think my whole purpose for saying that, I guess, is that God, in crises, God has a way of bringing people together and to looking for hope for better days.
So we could liken, in a small way, an unexpected pregnancy to twister or hurricane. It's kind of like the circumstances change. It's not the having the child, or whether it's a blob of tissue or a fetus. It's like the circumstances are overwhelming. And they would have to work through kind of similar layers, wouldn't they, as to what some of the victims at Katrina.
And it's interesting parallel with the water and the breaking of water and the life that comes after change. Yeah, there's another situation I found myself in Katrina. As a counselor, we set up this little clinic, and we were waiting for people to come. And then we realized how goofy that is. These are people who wouldn't think about going to sit and talk about their issues with someone. I mean, many of these folks were not folks who typically would go to counseling. So we just went out into the community to welcome them and to make sure things were okay. So I was wondering about the homes, their homes were a mat on the ground big enough for their family to stay. So we had, one time, 7,000 people in this arena. Everyone with, as much as a blanket would encompass. That was, quote, their home, unquote, for their stay. Well, anyway, so I'm wandering about, and I see this teeny tiny little head. Like, I've had 5 children, so I have an idea. I saw this newborn, and I approached the mother who was nursing the baby, and I said, how old is your baby? And she said, 1.5 days. Here she is on this mat, crowded in this facility, with three little girls and this infant newborn. And I said, what are you, you're 1.5 days, this is not safe for you to be in this area. Let's find a spot for you that's cleaner, that's more comfortable. Anyway, she told me her story, that she went to bed, her family went to bed that night, and the floor was wet. And so they got their 3 bigger girls, put them in bed with them, and they were going to ride out the storm and be in this bed together. So it's a husband, wife, 3 children. And she woke up then in the morning knowing that she needed help to birth the baby. She swung her feet over, and the water was then up to the bed. It had risen that far. So they made their way to the hospital and had the baby, and the hospital was closing. They had to just scurry out for shelter. So, so when I found her, I took her to our special medical area where she could then be cared for more carefully. But her heart, she had a newborn, but her heart was still with her husband and the 3 big kids. She's like, no, I want to be with them. So we, drug their cot up next to the hospital bed, or next to the room where she was, for comfort for them. So yeah, I mean, the heart of a mother is, it's there with the baby and with the other children too.
Yes.
So I really truly believe it's a God-given thing. Interesting enough, and I don't mean to keep going back to that Katrina thing, but as I'm talking about it, it just brings so many memories of motherhood in that situation. And as an example, there were people didn't know where anyone was in their family, and most predominantly, if they weren't with their mothers, they would ask about their mothers. Like this thug, I'll call him a thug. That's not politically correct. Sorry. The guy, holding up his pants because they would be off, down below his bottom if he didn't have them up. He came in and he said, I don't know where my mama is. I need my mama. I don't know where, and frantic, where's my mama? So we did what we could. And this woman came in that was like 80, in her 80s, barely able to walk. And she says, I don't know where my mother is. And I thought, okay, this woman is delusional. We'll get help for her. And I ended up using my cell phone from Indiana. We were in Louisiana. I used my cell phone to call someone in Boston who called someone in Alabama because the cell towers were down. So we were sort of like skirting around the country, and found her son, who said her mother is in a hospital back in New Orleans. So bless her heart, from this, just generational people loving their moms. And one other little girl who said, I took it upon myself to find the orphaned kids, the kids who were taken and they didn't know where their moms were or their families were. So I found these little kids, and I was rounding them up around the whole stadium saying, if you know anyone who's without their parent, please let me know. We're helping them find him. So I said to this little group of kids, I want to help you find your mama. Can I help you find your mama? And this little girl says, can you help me find my mama? I said, I'm gonna try, honey. Tell me, when did you last see your mama? She said, I ain't never found my mama.
Wow.
Oh.
Judith, thank you for sharing that story. You've been watching Support Life, and that's all for our program today. Join us again next week. Goodbye.